Thank you very much to Lise and to everyone at SceSam, is that how you pronounce it, for inviting me to be here. I said yes to be here today because I thought the topic was so important to take seriously at the level of the Akademi philosophy practice, as it is not enough taken seriously. So I'm very happy to be a part of that. And I actually want to begin a little bit anecdotally, because I'm a huge fan of Charlie Chaplin. Maybe some of you know this film. In 1921, he made a film called The Kid. And in this film, which has many, many layers, the tramp, the character the tramp, which is this internationally famous character, he reveals his heart through the discovery of an abandoned child, and he finds his own fatherly impulses. The tramp and the kid become friends. They work the streets together in scams and hurrahs. They run from the police. They run from bullies. Little Jackie Coogan plays the kid as a 5-year-old boy. The film traces the line between fantasy and autobiography for Chaplin himself. It embodies a kind of self-rescue where Chaplin gets to be the father he never had in a down-and-out London, finding play, finding love, finding dreams when there's really almost nothing even to eat. And he finds in this little lost boy an angel. The boy kind of saves him at the same time he saves the boy. And I think with this film a lot, not just about it, but with it. It's a kind of brain I use a lot. Because it, on the one hand, reminds us today that the boundary between the child and the adult self is very blurry, and it's one that we have to care for, like most boundaries, but at the same time, we have to understand how performative and slippery it can be. And in The Kid, we see the tramp switch roles, and he and the kid become each other many times. He's a mini tramp, and the tramp is a big kid. So the film illuminates a kind of core desire in the artist to rescue childhood through mutual dreaming. The tramp's very nature is childlike. We could say that the film, The Kid, is sort of as much for Chaplin, the maker, as it is for us, the audience, and for the kid in the story, or for kids everywhere. There's no clear answer. Is this the child's story or the adult's story? Is it the weeping of the man or the child when experiencing loss and recovery? There's a beautiful scene where the boy gets taken away from the tramp, and it's an incredible scene. I mean, I could cry just seeing it. It's all silent, but you see their faces, and it's a beautiful love affair broken up, and then there's a kind of reuniting. And it's whose story is it? It's also our story, the viewer. There's a philosopher I'm very fond of. Her name's Avital Ronell. And in a public talk in New York City in 2002, she described childhood not as a time in the past, but as a state of being that we enter into and out of throughout lifetime. It's kind of something we find and lose again repeatedly in the present. It's something we construct and something also that we throw away. And if we think for a minute that children are not part of that same social reality of finding childhood and then losing it and throwing it away and making it up as they go along, we forget that they're part of the same social reality as us. And if we forget that, we cannot be present with them. If we forget and we think that we're aiming our performances at children, rather than seeking our own stories with them. Yeah, I need that, thank you. Then we as witnesses and co-creators forget their personhood. They are our community as much as, or maybe more than, our critics and our patrons. And I'm talking about all theater. We need the kid as much as the kid needs us to tell stories. We are mutually dependent social actors creating the present. And this is where I get interested in thinking about theater as community and how the self is bound to community. Theater and performance are expressions of community, no matter what style. They're part of an expression of belonging or protest. They're a form of revolution or effigy, remembering the dead, or even hanging people live. Whose story is being told? Whose bodies labor on the stage? This is the power center in theater. Maybe more than the style. Whose story is it that we're telling? It is my view that the work of taking up a story on a stage, taking up a character, taking up an interaction, is a responsibility that the actor and the audience share mutually. The actor has to draw up the same questions, ethics, problems as actors, as practitioners in any theater or any venue. How to remain present, how to rely on the audience as powerful co-creators. We care about audiences. We think with them. And it's important that with any audience, an adult or child, that we don't overthink or assume what their experience is. We don't know what kids want. We don't even know what we want. So how do we find out? We co-create, we work together. And maybe that's where I can begin talking about presence in terms of acting. And this is a general conversation now. And it sort of begins with this question, which we all receive in the education a lot here in Norway and back in New York. What is an actor? What makes them different from other people? Is it the repetition of acts, the fact that we get up and repeat things? Is it an awareness of public? Is it knowledge of certain texts or certain manners or certain habits or certain movements? Well, all of us could be defined by these qualities. Those who practice theater and those who do not. So what you know, what you do alone doesn't define you as an actor. So what is needed to train an actor in contemporary society? I like to begin with thinking that actors are figures that make something happen in public space. And in making something happen, actors uniquely, perhaps, hopefully, have to take responsibility in public space, which means they're held accountable for what they do. This traditionally happens through critique, but we have an audience witnessing. We have an audience who acts as a community, and sometimes even as a kind of set of judges, determining what story we're telling and how it will be retold after we leave the door. The actor is one who can fail in public, who must fail in public. He or she must navigate, perform, and change historical or archival material. It's an excavator of the resonances and spaces, the social spaces as well as the private spaces. The actor challenges public discourses just by speaking a word aloud with an audience to hear. The actor also drops their body on the line between the taboo and sort of the accepted or the convention. The actor drops their body on the line between self and other, or multiple selves. And actors train also to become again like children in their sensitivity to their own perceptions and their ability to dream together with others. One of the things that I learned working with carnival artists in Trinidad in my 20s was that performance, many interesting people I had the privilege of learning from. One man, his name was Jeffrey Chalk. He was a Indo-Chinese Trinidadian. He taught me that carnival was being able to dream together responsibly. And I think that's a great definition for any kind of theater that cares about its public in an interactive way. Dream together responsibly. And that doesn't mean that we're sort of not here. Yeah, we're here. We're here in the moment, and we're actually dreaming together as a practice. Dreaming isn't something that inherently means that we're not present. In fact, to really dream together, we have to listen and be present. And it requires that we heighten our senses, heighten our perception, and that we care more about how red is, or what the sound of a particular note or drip of water is in our flesh, or a smell or a taste. That we dream together means that we can take in all of these sensations like a meal, and it transports our awareness, not out of the room, but actually in the room. So we spend a lot of time sort of not here. And theater is one of the rare opportunities to really be here together if it's shared well. At any time, stop me if there's something that you would like to make more clear. We can be also a bit interactive if needed, because I don't have the words on the board. Yeah. So I think about what is needed to actually train the actor, or what does the actor need today to be present, and what is presence? And one of the ways I begin defining that is that the actor is an intense subject. And so training is basically a process of intensifying a person, becoming more intense. So what does that mean? With some actors, it's very easy. Maybe they need to do the opposite, but or it's something else. But to intensify doesn't mean to become necessarily more emotional. It might, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. To intensify means to wake up and to become to assume less about your reality, to assume less about what's given, about the experience of a sound or a light or the way the body feels in the chair, to become so intensely perceptive of the physical, spatial, relational world that I question it, very important, and so I'm willing to change it, but also that I can share it in a way that's new, and maybe not a habitual way, that I can share what it means to sit and share with you in a way that I haven't before, that your being there makes me do it differently, that I'm not just in my daily script. And in fact, I feel that it's really important that we stop relying only on method as an actor training process. Methods can be really interesting to play with, but we can't rely on them because, in fact, they don't make us as present as contemporary practices demand. In order to really be present with each other, let's say even in a relationship right now, a human relationship, to really respond to you, I can't rely on my daily script. Otherwise, I just come in and shoot bullets at you. It doesn't matter if they land. But to really rely on you, I have to see what's going on and respond to the room. Yeah, and actually be willing to be thrown off, be made vulnerable, fail in public. So what is the apparatus? Is there a training apparatus for this or a practical apparatus for it? I would say that there's a concept. We have too many concepts, but there is one useful one, which is that you really have to care about your space as a present actor. Your space is important, whether that means that you get very engaged with scenography, or again, that you spend a lot of time investigating it with your senses, whatever's given in a site. So caring for the space, and I would say, to just bring it back briefly to work with children and young people, that this is very relevant and evident for many young people who are discovering still what are the rules of a space. Every space has its own secret code. It has a hidden transcript. It has a hidden set of rules. When we walk through that door, we all right? Because something about this setup says we must do that. And children don't always have that information, and they learn it by watching us, and they learn it by the space. So how can we use our awareness of the space to work with them to re-investigate and maybe even learn from them other possible ways of being in a space or building a space? So that's the only apparatus. Care about the space and your relation in it. I'm going to skip ahead, so I'm just moving my notes here. So we don't only work for an audience anymore. Yeah. Contemporary discourse demands that we work together with an audience, that we are co-creators. And we want to do this, but it's something we read a lot about and hear a lot about. Care about your audience. Get your audience involved. Well, sometimes audiences don't want to be involved. Sometimes they just want to be left alone in the dark, to have a private dream. That's fantastic. So we need to be able to relate to and deal with all of these different possibilities depending on the kind of work we want to make. However, we do want to make work with them, so we think about where are their butts in the seats? Where are they seeing us from? We think about how we place them, and maybe we leave them alone. But what is referred to as co-presence in performance theory, and we have authors like Jean-Luc Nancy, for example, writing about this. We find ourselves over-fetishizing the notion of presence, like, ooh, presence, it's so juicy, it's so perfect, if we can just get to it, God himself will come down, and manna will rain from heaven, and honey will come out of our mouths, and everything will be perfect. But actually, presence is also what charisma is made of. And we are also taught to critique and beware of fascist charisma. So presence is something to be wary of, as much as it is something to look for and try to create. Yeah, propaganda works with presence. I'm here with you now. I know what you want. We're together. I'm going to take you there. So presence is not inherently good. It's just very powerful. This is the Amatoka. I'm almost there. Contemporary performance practitioners go often beyond a specific genre of training, right? So we want to be present. We don't just train to be good singers or good dancers or good with text. We, again, as I mentioned, we want to train ourselves to be intense people, intense perceivers, intense social relators. And I believe that even 100 years ago, Stanislavski wanted this. He was looking at the work of 19th century sort of divas and saying, they're not really here. They can't even relate to the other actors on stage. We need to find a way to create a kind of internal solitude, he called it, for the actor. And over the course of modernity, his method got adapted and changed to modern aesthetics, and I would say modern modes of reproduction, so that even the machine age had an influence on Stanislavski technique, which is that there's a really clear method you can use to perfectly repeat and create this amazing product as an actor, which is your performance. And so now we're at a moment again where I'm sure if Stanislavski were here, he would have so much more interesting things to say, maybe than some of his followers, we could say. But now we're at another moment today where that is not a useful enough discourse, the method, we could say. But actually we are at a moment where we don't have one method we can rely on. So we have to begin with a skill, which I would argue is sort of one that everyone needs, whether they're working in the theater or not. And this skill is one of the keys or sort of the magic doors to presence, and that is listening. And I'm not the first one to talk about this. This is not my idea. There are many here in Norway, including a good colleague of mine, Camilla Egg-Tverbakk, who some of you probably know, who's researching this right now in her own work. Listening is an important part of actor training, as it is an important part of audience training. How do we train our audiences to want to be in the theater and actually want to be with us and care about what we say, what we do, what we sing, and not just maybe what's on the screen? And I think it requires that the actor and the audience be invited to care again about the senses, all of the senses of the body. So we can actually define presence maybe then as a reorientation towards the senses and also towards the other. Co-presence means that we're actually really interested in each other. There's a kind of ethical dilemma there. We really want to pay attention to each other, and yet we have something we want to get across. The audience comes in with an agenda. I have something I want to experience. I'm sitting here, that's my message to you. By sitting here, I'm saying to you, I have something I want to experience. I hope you can give it to me. And as a performer, as a practitioner, I certainly have something I want to get across. But we aim to pay attention to each other, to try to create that together through a kind of mutual listening, hopefully. And how do we do that? It's quite difficult. I'm going to give you a quote from a philosopher named Suzanne Yeager. She's writing about stage presence in the theater, and I think it's a good starting point to think about this co-presence or this listening. She says, stage presence can be defined as an active configuring and reconfiguring of one's intentional grasp in response to an environment. So that begins with me walking in this room, and maybe I know exactly what I'm going to do, but I'm allowing you to change that as I go along, or at least what I perceive to be you. She goes on, it is to be aware of the uniqueness of a particular audience and of certain features of a theatrical event, rather than performing a perfect repetition of a familiar and well-rehearsed pattern of behavior. It's disturbing. So actually, this sort of magical thing we talk about, oh, this person has stage presence. Well, if it's more than just charisma, if this person is a listener, if this person is with you, then they are being thrown off by you a little bit. And that's really fun to be a part of as an audience member. That's really pleasurable for a lot of different reasons. It's also scary and sometimes a little bit dissatisfying. But that's partly what's interesting about the theater, is that we do leave mostly dissatisfied, most of the time. As an American, I like to use the analogy of baseball, which is that if you can hit it, if you can actually make contact with the bat about 30% of the time, you're one of the best players in the entire MLB. 30% is one of the best. Most of the time you fail. The theater, I think, is like this. And that's partly what we're going to as audience members, or partly what we're engaging as practitioners. It's different than film in that way. Film can fail in a different way, but I think theater aims at failure as a kind of fetish. Yeah, it's a pleasure. And we need to protect and care for that failure. And engaging with young people in the theater, we also need to allow them to experience it. It's a really important part of social training, social life. Failure is interesting. Failure creates wisdom, knowledge. Failure creates relationships. Failure is anti-fascist. Across disciplines, we talk about people, and particularly artists, as having presence or even stage presence. And we know it when we see it, so to speak. But we rarely talk about sort of what it is or how it can be achieved. Some people are sort of born with it, and yet as craftspeople, we seek a more concrete analysis. How do we conjure it? What will create a space for its potential? It seems to both precede and destroy the notion of technique. It's not something that can be produced in a factory. Realizing presence is the greatest challenge to acting technique. The more you try, in a way, the worse it gets. And it presents a paradox in its very nature. So sometimes I like to think about the actor training as a kind of withdrawal of technique. This is and it's not to say that empty is better, or that where there's some pure state where the actor will get in and then they will be totally accessible. But a kind of aiming or an effort at losing all of the sharp and fancy tools. At the same time, the body has to train to be flexible and responsive. And perhaps the voice, most of all, has to be able to communicate. So we are laborers. We must work. Our bodies must work. But how we actually relate doesn't have a perfect formula. The notion of presence evokes a kind of discussion of perception and the troubling category of self from an authentic point of view. If I'm totally present, am I being my truest self? Or have I finally put myself out of my own way? I may experience someone or some space as having presence, but it's only truly powerful if over time I'm not the only one who has that opinion. It's something that is held eventually, repeatedly by a community, or at least a community that listens to each other. Like the experience of time and space, one cannot adequately deal with the concept of presence and a phenomena objectively. We experience time differently, we experience space differently. Presence is not objective. In fact, the self is constituted through perceptual experiences. Who you are is changing, no matter who you're with, and even to yourself throughout time. So the subject is in fact time itself. I am change. I am change. I am who you see me to be, and that evolves and adapts and falls apart and gets reconfigured. But these perceptions I have, even this argument I'm making about the changing self, is not even a scientific truth. One of the only things we might be able to agree on is that we act basically because we have desire. And this is where I feel the kid is a really interesting artistic piece of work. I enter that stage because I'm driven by a desire to be with you, my audience, or a desire to be with the self I think I become in that moment. So that desire actually puts me face to face with another problem, which is that the actor has the potential to be cruel. The actor has the potential to be selfish, self-absorbed. And in that sense, the actor must have, in order to act, the ability to ask for forgiveness. So the actor is a social figure because one can get up there again and again after night, and not only perform one's desire, but also perform one's apology, perform one's request for forgiveness, and even, I would argue, to perform one's promise to do it differently next time. And this is the temporality of the theater, which is different from, again, a recorded media like a film. And it's an irony of using the kid, but it was a silent film, somewhere between theater and film. I actually think it's quite crucial, though, that we understand that relationship between time and theater, that sort of ephemerality in its fragility, is one of the spaces or the permissive potentials of theater to be a social action. We can get up and do something that enrages a community. We can get up there the next night and deal with that rage at the same time that maybe we don't totally change what we've done. Hannah Arendt, the philosopher writing in the 20th century, a fantastic woman writing in America, but actually coming over from Germany, she had a theory of action, which is, I think, really interesting to everyone looking at the actor as a social figure. And she argued that in social space, action is only possible because of promising and forgiveness. That without that, we wouldn't do anything. We'd be frozen. We have the actual potential through action, which is something that we repeat, we can change. It's something that happens in time, in the presence of others, to actually alter ourselves, become anew, be reborn in the moment, and be remembered differently. She also talks about something called the community of memory. And for her, this would be the space of appearance. This is where things happen. And in this space, the theater, the center of the town, the city square, every action I take isn't really up to my control. I can decide what I do, but I don't have any control over its meaning. I don't have any control over its impact. Rather, you, the community of memory, you are the authors of what I have done. You decide how it's retold, if it's retold, or if it's erased. And I'm not talking about recording devices. Yeah, but I'm talking about other performances that my performance creates. And this is where storytelling and narrative never get old. How we remember, how we share memories, how we share experiences, this is the fruit of new theater. This is the fruit of being together as an audience. So the community of memory is one we don't have control over. We can help them gather, but ultimately we are their servants. Again, Suzanne Yeager describing presence. She says, presence is a kind of intimacy with a moment. Presence is an openness. It's an ability to experience a world. So maybe it's an ability to experience the world of my audience, or maybe it's the ability to experience the world of a play. It's the possibility of transformation. Presence as the possibility of transformation. Being willing to allow change, or let's say, being willing to support change. The power to concentrate. And she says presence is conscious, full-bodied engagement and responsiveness to change. So again, back to this notion of the intense subject. Becoming present or having the experience of presence through performance can be invited through intensification of participants senses. How do we do this? We put audiences in intimate contact with each other. That only works maybe 1% of the time, but we can do it. But they're already there. We breathe next to each other. We hear each other speak. We hear whispers, the opening of candy, the sounds of a baby. And just paying attention to that and drawing attention to that for our audience, we are here, this is happening now, in a very light way, can actually change the way we listen. This heightened sensory state, sometimes referred to as the real or the authentic, and I don't find that useful. Actually, the real or the unreal is it's just different degrees of dreaming to some extent. It may not be relevant to our definition of reality, but a believability or a willingness to believe in the moment does have an impact on how we identify presence in performance, which means I give my time to you. I come in and give my time, and I believe in that gift. And I believe in what it will lead me to. And it might lead me to rejection, or something worse, or something even scarier, which is big love. So to give time, to really put the phones away, the texting and and I would even argue, if you were my students right now, I wouldn't let you take notes for a minute, to just say, like, just listen, you're not going to lose anything. You're going to get it all, what matters. So there's something about just giving time and letting something else happen other than trying to be somewhere else, like the future where you're going to use all the information. How am I doing on time? Speaking? Okay. Yeah. I take a few more minutes. So I want to go briefly again into listening. And I want to think about, give you something concrete, not just something philosophical. And some of you may know this already, but if you've ever looked at the diagram of the ear, you would know that the ear is a percussion instrument. And you should look it up if you don't know already. It's a beautiful thing, and I'm going to describe it to you, and I want you to imagine it if you can. Other than touch, sound via the skin and the human ear is the only sensation based on the function of physical movement. Sound is a vibration in matter, whether it be in earth and liquid, water, or gas. A vibrating object sends a wave of pressure fluctuations through the atmosphere, where contact is eventually made with the ear. It functions like an instrument with different parts. They have tiny little roles in this performance, which makes you hear. There's something called the pinna, which is the outer ear, and that catches the sound waves. And this happens depending on direction. You notice when you do this, you hear differently. And big ears can hear better. No shame in having big ears. The tympanic membrane, the eardrum, we call it in English, is like a tympani of the ear. It's got a thin cone-shaped piece of stretched skin, about 10 millimeters wide, between the ear canal and the middle ear. And it connects to the throat through something called the eustachian tube. So air from the mouth and the outer ear create pressure on this membrane and keep it tight. So you have this incredible dynamic wind instrument, percussion instrument connecting to each other. The cochlea, or the inner ear, when vibrations rattle, the eardrum and the cochlea uses fluid to conduct tiny vibrations deeper into the ear. It's like an amplifier. And then down in there you have these tiny, beautiful little bones called ossicles. They are the smallest bones in the body. Very, very tiny. And they create a percussive effect like a hammer and anvil with a stirrup. And they also amplify the vibrations through a membrane where 30,000 reed-like fibers resonate according to the frequency of the sound transmitted. In the case of a very loud sound, these fibers are destroyed. And you hear your ears ringing after a concert, it's those fibers trying to come back. And when those fibers are destroyed, we have an adrenaline release. And that adrenaline release is sort of a nervous system response to sound. And that's often why we get excited in a positive or negative way, depending on our taste, by loud music or different kinds of loud sounds. So we think about this not just as a beautiful technology, but actually sound is a form of touch. It's a very powerful form of touch. The performer, the actor in social space, isn't just saying things which have references, which you can look up or you can understand if you think about them or if you've done the right education. But the actor is touching you with sound. And many other senses are activated, of course. And the performer, one who speaks or sings or sounds, is touching themselves. Yeah, they're making something happen in the body. They're becoming present in a different way. And we share this air that we breathe in and out as a medium, which is very different from the visual medium, but one that must be remembered when we think about not just the idea of presence, but its impact. Yeah, its ability to create a nervous system response, its ability to go beyond meaning or circumvent meaning, in the sense that meaning isn't always the way to be together. Understanding isn't always the way to be together. Knowing the same things, agreeing. But to experience vibration, and I'm not being sort of like hoodoo voodoo, I mean vibration and sound. To experience that mutually and to have different responses is a wonderful, amazing experience that the architecture of theaters is created to allow. So if we think about sound as the spatialization of selves, letting us emerge through the experience of sound. I become who I am when I hear my own voice. My child screams or cries and he hears his self happening. That spatialization of self, that is presence, and it's also a kind of ethical call. Do I answer the cry? Do I shut it off? Do I act? So we're calling upon audiences to have a response. And one response sometimes can be to leave, and another response can be to talk back. And I have a colleague who works in West Africa. He's a Nigerian man named Owam Amka. And he used to tell us that, he would say, audiences in the West are so quiet and so boring. He said, in the West African context, audiences often talk back. Different kinds of genres, audiences often talk back, and in talking back say, kind of do their part, make the theater event happen. And he would say that many of the practitioners would leave the theater and they would say, well, that was a good audience, or that was a bad audience, meaning that was a good show or a bad show. They did their part, or they didn't really do anything. So again, to think about how we engage an audience and how we as audiences train each other to listen differently. I'll end there. Thank you.